Hello, this is Claudia Johnson from Pro Bono Net LawHelp Interactive. Thank you all for joining us in our bi-monthly call. Today we have a best practices call and we are having guest speakers. We have Angela Tripp, who in our community doesn't need introductions because she's so awesome. And she's presenting with Ashley Treni, who is with GAP, and together they just wrapped up a TIG project where they actually really went into user centric design and then usability testing. And I'm very excited to have them share with our community here. Because though we talk about these topics and one-on-one, when I connect with a lot of you, we do talk about taking a user-centric approach. I thought that the materials and the findings, the feedback that they got and they continue to get were great. So hopefully this can be at the end, we can have a lot of conversation. This is software neutral in the sense that it doesn't matter what tool you're using. It's even app neutral. Their project wasn't necessarily just centered on forms. But we are the form people, the enthusiast form enthusiasts, free form enthusiasts. So hopefully we can focus on that, but hopefully at the end, if you have materials you have seen or used, or if you have already looked at some of the materials that have been circulated through lists, etc., really let's have a conversation because I think this is very exciting. So the only thing I'm gonna say after that, before we move on to our guest speakers, is that we do record the call and the call will be recorded and we're gonna put it in the resource center for LHI. And then I'm gonna send it also, when I send a message to the list, I'll attach the link on the YouTube in case people wanna look at it and review or share it with others in their staff that can't be here, etc. So I am going to be quiet now and I'm going to make Angela our presenter.
Great, thank you, Claudia. I'm really excited to be here with Ashley. I'm gonna kick us off and then she's gonna do the bulk of the presentation with me piping in like I do. So we called this presentation and the report that we did Build a Better Blank. And it's not, it's not super friendly if you're reading it out loud, but we called it that because we didn't want to tie it down to building a better form or building a better website or building a better brochure. That really the principles and strategies that we're talking about are for anything that we're creating that's going to be consumed by the public. So that's sort of the story behind the name, which I don't know, I like, but it's sometimes a little frustrating to say. So just a little background on the current TIG project. We are using this mix of in-person trainings and longer term training courses, audits where the GAP experts looked at existing resources from the perspective of making suggestions to changes, panels such as this one and other conferences, and other resources such as templates and examples. We wanted to gather all this together with the goal of increasing the usability, design, and testing expertise within our legal services community. And that might be in legal aid, it might be in self-help centers, it might be within courts. You know, we define that very broadly. It can even include, you know, those you know, form developers who are contractors. These are really information for all of us in this community. The specifics of what we've done, we hosted 2 10-week courses focused on UX design and usability testing. That GAP ran and operated. There were a total of 24 legal services organizations, and that not just legal services, but legal services and courts and self-help centers. So 24 organizations participated. Many organizations sent multiple people. So I would say probably close to 100 people benefited directly from these 10-week courses. So we have created a small army of experts. In addition, the GAP, which is the Graphic Advocacy Project, who was our partner in this TIG, They did 14 audits on various resources, maybe intake forms, guided interviews, and more. So that was that sort of expert advice piece. The third piece was the report that I'm going to talk about in the next slide, but the last remaining piece is a usability testing workshop at the LSC IT conference, which I will still call TIG, the TIG conference next January. So we are about to release some information to the community in the next couple of weeks, but the vision is that we're going to have a pre-conference day set aside for a small group of organizations to do usability testing live together. We'll get a bunch of testing subjects from Phoenix, where we'll be, and they can come in and do, multiple usability tests with multiple organizations if they want. And then the organizations can all talk, prepare together, do the testing together, and then kind of unpack what they learned together, and then maybe do a short, quick share out to those conference attendees who have rolled into Phoenix by the end of that pre-conference day. So if you're interested, if you think you're interested in that, put it on your calendar as the day before the rest of the conference. And like I said, we'll be sending out more information via LSNTAP, SLRN, and the doc assembly listservs. This is that third piece that I was talking about, the report that was released back in July. This is a link on the slide, which you can go right to the whole report. It's also, the report, it lives on the LSNTAP website, so you can also just go there and find it. Later in September, we're going to be releasing like a more interactive version of this report with videos and templates and things that will also be hosted on the LSNTAP website. So you'll see more about that coming across your email inbox as well. So this report combines highlights of all the major findings with resources and templates. And that's kind of, our presentation today is kind of a short run through some of the important concepts, really tailored for the interactive forums. Oh, thank you for putting the link up, Claudia. Tailored for the interactive forums gurus like you. So I think this is the point where Ashley is going to take it over. Is that right, Ashley?
Yes, sure, I can jump in. Yes, thank you for the great introduction, Angela. Yeah, we are having, because it's still going on, a wonderful time working on this grant with the Mission Advocacy Program and Angela and the team. And yeah, as Angela mentioned, I think this presentation will kind of be a high-level recap of everything that you'll find in the best practices report, with a special focus on some things that we observed through our classes, through our audits, that are more specific on forms. But just to orient us to start, we talk about, user experience design, usability testing, but at the heart of this, what do we really mean by something that's user informed, and why is it important? You can go to the next slide, please. So the process that we're really trying to advocate for, that many are advocating for, is really shifting from a design model where there is no user input to bringing the people who are actually using the resources that you are creating into the process. And we'll go through the process at a high level and kind of highlight some of these opportunity areas. But at a high level, this is really intended to just take an intentional moment to pause before we dive into creating resources, to think about how we might learn about the needs, the motivations, how, again, the folks who are actually going to be using these resources might engage and interact with them. And by capturing those learnings, actually designing in a way that brings in those insights into the process. Next slide, please. So user experience, when we talk about user experience, I think it's very easy to think about, the look and the feel of a website or an app. But when we talk about user experience, we're actually zooming out a lot more. We're not just talking about the design of the thing, of the website, of the form, of the brochure, right? As Angela mentioned, this is very sort of, output agnostic, if you will. But the user experience is really how someone engages with that resource as a whole and what that experience is like for them. So design in this context can apply to many different types of things that we've just mentioned. And user research and this user experience design process as a whole can really help us to learn how our users are actually engaging with these resources, gathering feedback, learning, right, about how they're engaging with it as a way to actually, bring those insights and those ideas back to design an even better user experience for whatever that thing might be. And what you'll see in the high-level process overview that we'll go through in just a moment is that there's always opportunity to learn. Sort of a core principle of user experience design is that you are constantly iterating to make it better, right? It's not, we created this resource and we're never going to look at it again, but embedded in this process are opportunities to continue to learn how your users are engaging with the tool and iterate slowly and over time to improve the user experience of the resource as a whole. Next slide, please. User experience design, there's a lot of terminology, so human-centered design, user-informed design, these are all terms that you may have heard before. But really at the core of human-centered design and user experience design are these sort of core principles. So the first is to really focus on the people that are directly affected by the issues that you're working on, right? So as you are intending to create a resource for a specific audience or a specific type of issue, right, really understanding the people who are impacted by that specific issue or topic. As well as other people who might be a part of that process, right? Who are other stakeholders or partners or people who are part of the experience of that end user. It's about focusing on the right problem. So really trying to understand where those root causes and those pain points are. It's very easy to kind of just look at the surface level and look at some of the symptoms of some of the problems. But what this really challenges us to do is dive deeper and really try to understand those sort of the root cause of a lot of the problems and how that might inform our solutions. And then finally, that everything is part of a system. And so it's really important to understand how things are connected. And that really impacts user experience when we think about the pathways that users take to connect to said resource, to connect to said form. How are they actually discovering it? How are they identifying that they have an issue? And what are the steps that they take in order to, go about solving that issue? What do they do after, right? So their experience doesn't end once they complete the form. Their experience is continuous. And so understanding that, these resources don't live in isolation. They are, part of a much larger system of a process of stakeholders, of, many different complex systems that are working together, and understanding how those things are interconnected can also really help to inform solutions. There's a great video that's linked there as well. So why is this important? Again, so before we dive into, designing the resource, user experience design and human-centered design really helps us understand behaviors and pain points, needs and motivations of the folks who are coming to access these resources. It just allows us to create empathy, to create a deeper understanding of what they're intending to do and what's bringing them here. We can do this through a variety of methods, which the best practice report really dives into. It's very different depending on sort of the scope of the project, the stage of the project, and the goals that you have for the project, or even the user's goals in interacting with the resource. Again, it's really important to expose those root causes of the problems to really dive deeper and understand what's driving a lot of the pain points. And it ensures that we are building the right thing and building the thing right. So again, in that sort of space of making space, creating space before you dive into solutioning is just that intentional moment to really think about, is this what users need? Is this the right way to get them this information? And then, usability testing and other best practices can really help us to make sure that as we are designing whatever the thing is, we're bringing in those best practices along the way so that we're building it in an accessible and inclusive way. Build with, not for, is a way that I think UX design has really grown to talk about this. So it's actually a process of collaborating, of co-designing with your end users. It's kind of shifting that expert mindset of we are the experts, we will make this, but actually building it with them, designing it with them, and not just for your end users. And of course, I think why we're all here, that it makes things easy to use and useful, right? At the end of the day, is it something that users can easily navigate and actually accomplish that goal that they've set out to do? And I'll just read this here, but I think you can all see it. Putting people at the center of the design process is our best chance of getting adoption, making an impact, and achieving success. So I'm just going to do a lightning round of how do we do it and kind of give a high level of the process. The best practices report and the interactive version that will be released soon will dive deeper into the process as a whole. But when we talk about this process, I think what I'd like to kind of highlight is that it is a continuous process, but there are also different places that you can jump in depending on where you're at. So you might start with usability testing and then actually come back to user research. But we are really advocating for actually starting the process with user research, really understanding the audiences that you're designing for and letting that inform the resource that you design. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of different visualizations of sort of the UX design process. This is one model that we really like called the double diamond. You'll see this a lot if you Google UX design. But what this visualization does a really great job of capturing is that there are sort of these divergent points where you're doing a lot of information gathering. So that first triangle where we're going out, we're doing a bunch of research, we're learning a whole lot, we're trying to really understand those root causes, who are our users. So in that way, we really diverge and create space for listening and learning and understanding. And then moments of convergence. So you see here with insights where we're coming together and looking at all of the information that we've gathered, teasing out important insights and things that might inform our solutions. Diverging again for ideation, really thinking, now that we have this research that can guide our solutions, what are the ways that we might approach building a solution? And I think oftentimes what you'll see is that maybe your initial hypothesis of, what you might design actually really changes or, shifts in some way based on the user research that you've uncovered from that previous section. Finally, you may have a lot of ideas, you may have a lot of approaches for how to solve those core problems that you've honed in on, and prototypes and usability testing, which we'll talk about, are ways to really hone in and feel confident that the solution that you will then go and build and create really addresses those user pain points and will help users accomplish their goal. All along, you can see those gray arrows that show that the process is iterative. Again, this is, sort of a continuous learning cycle. It's not necessarily a one and done, right? There's always opportunity to go back and continue learning. This is GAPS, the Graphic Advocacy Project's version of this, and this is kind of, emblematic of the process, which is follows a traditional UX design process, but more specifically for this legal context. So just another way to sort of present the process that was shown on the previous slide, but identifying a problem that a community is facing, planning, working with advocates, again, that sort of information gathering and learning, working with communities, talking with people, understanding their experiences, designing, thinking about what are those solutions, getting feedback, of course, revising, right, iterating. As we get feedback, we can do a lot of iteration before we actually, release that final project and distribute it. And even after it's distributed, we can always reflect and improve to make sure we are continuously updating our resources to make sure they are usable and accessible. So Angela, I'm going to go through these pretty quick, just just as an FYI. So step
Okay.
one, I'm just going to kind of do a bit of a drill down from both of those process diagrams we looked at, but step one is really defining your problem. So as you are thinking about the spaces that you're in, right, the resources that have been created to address certain problems, it's really important to define what that problem is, right? What is the problem that you are intending to solve, or what is the topic space that you're exploring? Starting here, and we have some templates that support this that we can show, really helps to focus in before you jump to solutions, really understanding what the problem is, who's impacted by the problems, and that helps you identify who your users are and what you need to learn from them in order to take the next step. So step two, learning from your users. Actually engage with the people who are affected by that problem that you've defined to understand their experience and their needs. There are a lot of different types of research methods, from very hands-on, like contextual interviews, to surveying that's more hands-off. And the best practices report goes into a bunch of different methods. But really, step two is about leaving your assumptions at the door. Whatever you think you might know about, someone's lived experience, this is that opportunity to stop and listen and learn. And remember that, you don't know everything, but together with your users, you know a lot. So going back to that sort of co-design and shifting, who the expert is in that scenario to gather that information. Synthesizing learnings into insights. So this is where, again, there's a lot of great resources that are provided in the best practices report for how to actually do that, right? Once you've gathered this wealth of information from talking with individuals, you can synthesize your learnings into insights, and those help to inform what your solution might be. Best practice here, approaching the problem holistically. So again, trying to remember the root causes, those systems, so that as you're thinking about solutions, you're also thinking about how and where that solution might fit into other resources, other systems and processes that are already in play. Ideate. So this is where we can take all of those great learnings, really think about the solutions. Ideation is a great moment where, we give ourselves that creative permission to dream and think, how are all the ways we might solve this problem, but making sure that our user research is at the center of that. So, as we're deciding that, we might want to build an SMS tool that's informed because we know that, we saw that a lot of users are accessing information on their phones and feel very comfortable with this specific technology. So ideation is very fun, but all about relating it back to what you learned from those conversations. And just reiterating here what we mentioned in the beginning, UX, and when we talk about ideation, it's not just what the tool looks like. Solutions come in all shapes and sizes. They can be forms, digital or print. They could be outreach strategies. It could be, collaborating with a hotline center to understand what the frequently asked questions are that are coming in and bringing that into your process. So ideation doesn't have to be limited to a specific type, right? You can really think about all of the different solutions and ways, again, sort of based on those research learnings, to get these resources into the hands of your users. Prototyping. So prototyping is a great way to bring solutions to life in a fast and iterative way. So it can be very daunting, the process of, here's what we need to build, let's start building it. Prototyping is an approach that allows you to build, in small steps and incrementally, and think through the solution more holistically before fleshing out all the details, right? Before, deciding on all of the different flows that might need to happen. Actually just, creating a prototype of your solution to kind of actually walk through it yourself and feel, how does this feel? What is this like? Think about it from the perspective of your users. And some best practices for prototyping that we just would like to call out. It's really important to design with real content, I think, especially in a legal design context, right? Because the content is sort of the core piece of the experience. Prototyping is invaluable before you actually invest any technical time. So you can make, low fidelity prototypes either using sketching, right? Sketching on paper. You can leverage existing technology like survey tools, Google Forms, right? create a survey in Google Forms first and see what the flow is like, see how it goes before actually, developing it out as a way to test it and try it, right? And then iterate on, based on your prototype. This is where usability testing comes in. Thank you, Angela, perfect timing. So getting feedback. Prototypes are a great way to get early feedback from your users, and then bring that feedback back to the prototype so that by the time you're ready to do the final design and then build the technical solution, you've already validated, right? A lot of the things you've validated with your users, that the information is clear, that the flow of the questions makes a lot of sense, that they understand the visual cues and the hierarchy that you're using to communicate information to them. So you can do usability testing, with prototypes. You can do usability testing with existing tools to understand how to improve those existing tools. But definitely advocating for getting that feedback and iterating over time, right? To bring in those learnings. You don't have to do it all at once. You can do it slowly and surely, or slowly but surely. And that's why, iteration is sort of at the heart, the last step of the UX design process. We never stop, right? Listening, we might get feedback from our users about a resource. How do we bring that feedback, to iterate on the existing resource as a whole? So that was a lightning round of the UX design process. I want to also kind of dive into some of the challenges that we saw specifically in the legal tech space through the courses and the projects that our course participants were working on, as well as the audits. And many of them were, form design or survey design. So just wanted to highlight that, some of these challenges are ones that you may run into as you try to bring user-centered design into your process, depending on where you start. But, there are some things that are challenging, and participant recruitment can definitely be one of them, right? Connecting with folks who are, either potential users of your tool or currently using your tool. You have to be very intentional about the way that, you ask for feedback and ask for folks' time. So, leveraging existing relationships with clients, connecting with partners who are also reaching, the folks leveraging your resources to try to set up, recruitment through a partner are great ways to connect with end users. So there are also some more details in the best practices report for how to do participant recruitment. Of course, COVID posed a challenge for all of us this year. There are actually a lot of great opportunities for remote feedback sessions, either through Zoom or any of the other platforms that we use. So there are different ways to connect with users virtually, and we've highlighted some of those in the best practices report as well. One of the things that we heard is it can be challenging to collect research and feedback as a neutral entity. So we had, courts or law libraries or folks who, are really trying to present that neutral, unbiased information. And so it's really important when you're engaging end users, to explain to them the process, right? We are collecting this feedback to improve this resource. Any insight or feedback that you can give us will help us accomplish X, Y, and Z. And that can, certainly be hard if, depending on the context in which you're engaging with your end users. Iterating on established tools with limited resources. So, there are so many great tools that already exist, and I'm sure many of you are, updating them and maintaining them as we speak. And so it can definitely be challenging to iterate on those tools, especially with limited resources, whether that be, folks who can do this user research or, folks who can help actually create the forms and the surveys or, engineering capacity. So work within those constraints. Again, you can do that continuous learning, think about creative ways to bring in feedback, right, through surveys or maybe more automated ways, and build iteratively. You can build incrementally and iteratively because those constraints are very real. Some of the challenges that we saw, and this is especially in the audits that we did, again, which contained a lot of forms and surveys and widgets and flows, process flows of that nature. Just want to highlight these three. I think these are especially important, but something that we saw that can be a challenge with implementing solutions are content and communication. So some best practices that we really want to highlight are using plain language can go, such a long way. There are a lot of great tools like Write Clearly and other things that help, to ensure that you're writing for a level that your user is going to be reading it, right, and might not know legalese. Standardizing content and templates can really help you, right? You as someone who's creating forms, who's creating these flows, so that every time you need to create a process, you don't have to start from scratch. So thinking about how to standardize content or visual design across, your different forms or resources, whatever you might be making, can be so invaluable for giving yourself a template and a blueprint to really focus on the content and the flow and that user experience of the resource itself. And form and article design best practices. I have a slide here. We can dive into that in just a moment, but there are a lot of great resources that dive into form best practices that I've linked to here, and we can talk about those in just a moment as well. Information architecture and navigation was also something that we saw was a challenge, across, and it makes sense. You have a lot of different users coming for different goals. So how do you really streamline that, flow of information to help folks connect to the right information? It might not just be users. You might have partners who are accessing your resources. There might be other people who are coming to find information. So thinking about ways to elevate information for different audiences, making sure to add, linked navigation across relevant content so that, there's always a way to get to that information, even if a user can't find that sort of direct process. And clear information hierarchy. So, zooming out, when you think about all the forms that you have or all of the resources that you have, how are those being organized? And is that a user-friendly way, right? As the person coming in with this situation, is it intuitive for them to say, oh, I might find what I'm looking for, right, in this sort of section? So really taking a moment to step back and make sure that your information hierarchy is user-friendly as well. Visual design, web design, and accessibility. So these are really important, and you don't have to have a beautiful, polished resource, right, that has lovely graphic design. I think there are a lot of visual elements and web design elements that can go such a long way just to make things clear and clean and simple. And leveraging web accessibility guidelines is just another way to make sure that folks who are coming in with different disabilities can also, if you're on the web, can engage with and find the information that they're looking for as well. So we also have a lot of great resources for accessibility guidelines, different web design principles, and visual design, right? Just simple graphic design, thinking about this, titles, what are subtitles, how are you using text styling to really make a clear flow and help the user, self-identify what type of information they're looking for throughout a given process. So here are some of the best practices for form design that I just wanted to highlight. These are some best practices that we shared with many of the groups who are writing, either forms or surveys. Again, we saw both print and digital. And these are echoed in a lot of the resources that are also shared in this slide deck, as well as the best practices report. But, a lot of these things may seem very intuitive, but may be hard to execute when you actually get into it and you're working with real content. So it's good to just be reminded of some of these principles and give yourself that space to simplify. So the first is to set expectations from the start, right? Provide really clear instructions. How much time it will take to accomplish the survey, what are the sort of steps or parts of the survey, any information that you can give the user at the onset, right, to help them understand what they're about to enter can go a long way. And, really thinking about how to streamline that in a, a simple and visual way, keeping it simple, trying not to have, large blocks of text, but thinking about, how can you really help the user quickly identify and understand, what this resource will help them accomplish. Clear hierarchy and visual style is very connected to the one right below it. Visually group related labels and fields. So, as a user is engaging with a form or a survey, right, they're looking at different text treatment. And so if you have a standardized way that you're treating your titles, your subtitles, your help text, maybe an icon to highlight, something that you want to call out. Doing that and using that consistently across is invaluable to a user who is recognizing, right, as they're engaging with this information, they're recognizing the patterns, and it can actually really help the user experience and the overall usability of the resource itself if you have those really clear hierarchies and those consistent visual styles. And then relating, connecting related types of information in a similar way. List questions in order of difficulty with the easiest first. So, if you put yourself in the position of someone who's maybe coming to fill out this form and you put like a really difficult weighted question to start, like, ooh, that's the tone that you're setting for your user for that experience. And so thinking about, from their perspective, how are they being brought in? What is the flow of questions that they're engaging with? Help them warm up, help them understand why they're answering these questions, right? Especially when they get really personal. I will answer this question because it helps determine X, Y, and Z. So again, thinking about easing them in that very personal way, starting with, sort of the easiest or the simplest question to answer first. One column design, this I would really advocate for, whether it's a print or a form. I think just thinking cognitively about how people process information, it's a lot harder to kind of skip across fields and, when you're kind of looking here and looking there. So present a really clear, single column layout when you're, creating forms and surveys for a user so that they can process each piece one at a time and really engage with the information at hand. Forms, form labels and instructions, you always want those to live outside of the actual line. When a user, if we're talking in a digital sense, right, if a user clicks in to answer the question, and then it disappears, and then they, might not remember, oh, shoot, what am I supposed to be typing here? So it's always good to have form labels and instructions that are above the answer field, or, in both, right? You can have help text within the field, but also have that label above so that wherever a user is in the experience, if they happen to be mid-engagement, it's very clear, again, that question that they're answering and what their focal point is at that point in time. Offer instructions on formatting. An example can go such a long way. It's always so helpful to see an example where possible, or recommend, maybe it's in the help text, right, an example of what that formatting might look like. And label fields as optional. There's, different strategies for this. I think, the best practice is if most of them are required, then label the ones that are optional as optional. And the inverse, if most of them are optional, you want to label the ones that are required as required, and make sure that that visual style is really clear. An important piece for accessibility is, don't just rely on color, because if someone is colorblind, they might not miss that, or they might miss that. So if you just make something red that is required, they might miss it. So use an icon as well, use bold, right? Think about other visual treatment that you can make to really, differentiate that for your user so it's very clear to them what they need to do. Okay, how am I doing on time? I just want to check in because I see that we're at 2:45 Eastern Standard Time. Do I have about like another 5 minutes?
I think we should probably.
Go ahead, Angela.
Oh no, I was gonna go ahead, Claudia.
No, I was gonna say maybe you can go for another 5 minutes, and I you had a lot of other tools and artifacts that may be helpful. Maybe save a little time to flag some of those quickly, so that people know that there's some depth of resources in there.
Yes. Yeah, so
it actually is the last 5 minutes of the presentation.
Okay.
I think it's perfect.
Yeah, Angela, if you want to jump to, I think these are all things that are embedded in the best practices report. So these were just tips that, as we engaged in conversations in the course and the audits, found ourselves recommending. So those are really there. We know it can be intimidating to start bringing this process into your practice. So those are just, ways to think about getting started. But here are the template resources. So these are available in the link that Claudia shared earlier and are part of the best practices report and will be in the interactive version on LSN Tap as well. But we have the UX audit template that we did for the 14 resources. And it's available to look at. So if you're, interested in either hiring someone to do an audit of your site or maybe trying to do it yourself, there are sort of three parts to this UX audit that we've highlighted, which you can see in the template itself. But the first is called a cognitive walkthrough, and that's where you actually walk through your resource from the perspective of a user who's trying to accomplish a goal. So you define what that goal is. I need to fill out X, Y, and Z. And you go through it not from your perspective as the person who's created the form, but from a person who might actually be using it. And it can help to show where some of those hiccups are, where some of the, maybe moments of tension or things that are unclear. It helps to reveal those opportunities. A heuristic evaluation are really web design best practices in particular. So those are really looking at, can a user navigate back to a page that they were at before, right? Trying to avoid user error or putting a user in a position where they don't know what to do and get stuck. And then the third piece is the accessibility review. And the best practices report goes very into depth about a lot of the resources that we use. There are so many great ones, quick ones, right, that you can check a color against, right? If you want to use a color for your site and you want to make sure it's web accessible, you can go in and put in the hex value and it'll tell you if it's, compliant or not. So a lot of great resources that you can just, start diving into and using right away. As part of the UX design course, so some of the resources that are embedded in the best practices report, and some of which I mentioned throughout the process of sort of the high level UX design overview, are a research plan. So that's really, again, how do you define the problem statement, who your potential users are, the people impacted by that problem, and what research methods are you going to use to do that information gathering. So that's a really great resource for getting started, whether it's on an existing project that you want to learn about or you're starting a new project. I highly recommend checking out the research plan. The interview guide is best practices and a script for conducting user interviews, if that's something that you're interested in doing, again, to learn more about your user's experience. We have a usability testing script in there, so I know that that is very much of interest for this group. So this is, if you have existing forms that you want to, assess by sitting with users as they walk through it. Again, you can do that in a remote capacity through screen share and other. This is a great usability testing script that can help you craft your own and really hone in on, the pieces and parts that you want to learn and listen in your own resources. The notes grid is sort of our template for actually, bringing in all this information and organizing it. And then finally, the synthesis, right? So that's actually a mural board. I don't know if folks are familiar with mural, but it's a really fun interactive space. It's like a digital whiteboard. So you and your colleagues can actually, oh yeah, thank you. It's linked right here. Can actually like digitally organize a lot of the insights that you create. This is another resource we wanted to flag. So again, to the navigation and architecture piece, if you're thinking about a process flow, and this might very well be the case with a form where you have, 4 or 5 different steps that you're trying to bring a user through. Optimal Workshop is a great resource where you can do sort of tree testing and card sorting and understand what a user is expecting to happen as you take them through a sort of process and navigation. The next slide, I believe, is yes. Next slide, Angela. So close. Just some highlights that I pulled out. Again, these are all available in the best practices report, but for this crew in particular, some usability testing links, a really great article about, survey design, another for using wizards for questions, and then the next page is all about form design. So there's some really great resources. There's the Form Design Patterns book, which is where a lot of those best practices were pulled from, as well as some other great resources, again, for both print and digital forms, thinking from, you know, the visual design all the way through that sort of flow of information. So I would definitely check out these different resources for form design for you all in particular. And I think that's it. I think thank you is the last slide. So I'll hand it back to Angela.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. That was a great drive through all of these materials, and I appreciate the extra materials at the end that are specifically for forms gurus. So I know we don't have a lot of time if people have questions. Nothing was added in the chat, but you can feel free to add a question in the chat or raise your hand. And then we'll leave a few minutes for Claudia at the end to do her business part of the call.
No, that was really great. Thank you so much. Anybody have any questions or anything that they want to share? Maybe they started a project without knowing about some of these approaches, and then they found this in the middle of I mean, that's my favorite message that you gave, is that you don't have to start, like, it doesn't, like, you can come into at any point, and that is always going to be an ongoing process, right? Particularly when you have really limited resources, how important it is to really define the problem really well, but then to be iterative, but also that you can start incorporating some of these approaches at any point. So even if you didn't start it that way, you may be able to say, hey, I can start using this. I can, you know, we're not at this point of the project, we can start doing this. So to me, that's a very uplifting message, that this is a technique, this is an approach that you can bring into your project, even if you didn't start out with it. Just wondering if people have had that experience. I think, you know, for when I support a lot of projects that are starting on forms, I always encourage them to take time to do the planning before they do the actual interview. I think that with technology, particularly when you have very gifted technology people, the rush is to create the artifact without doing a lot of the planning that you call that standardization, I think. You know, standardizing all the images, standardizing how the questions are going to be presented, and the instructions, everything that you need. And taking a little time to do that ahead, so that if you're doing one form or 100 forms, can really benefit.
Right, and then part of the iteration is that you can user test just that standardized part. You know, like maybe it's just like how you collect name, address. You know, maybe it's just a few pieces that you want to standardize, and then you can usability test just that piece, and that will save. And then once you have that down, then you can use that in all of your forms or all of your interviews.
So like if you, yeah,
chunk it out.
When, like, if you're just doing instructions with plain language and icons, like we recommend, you could just test your instructions. That would be like a prototype for any type of law, and that will save you a lot of time, because once you release the first set of forms, and say that you release a CDC letter with instructions, which is a simple form, which is perfect for automation, and you know that you're getting feedback that people are using the form, and that people are being able to submit it and follow the plain language and the icons that you created as they print out, then you will be more confident when you give more complex instructions, if you use the same protocol, because it's already been started. So it can build, and then there could be times where you realize, wow, no, this process is more complex. So we're gonna need to come up with a new icon, and then you can test that icon on that paragraph, and it can be really, if you have curiosity, and I think all of us that are struggling with access to justice, we have to be curious, it can be really positive. So I'm gonna change screens, but if anybody once you know, I'm posting the recording and everything, and I'm gonna change it, but I hope that some of you find this helpful. You can come back and view the call. I love the presentation. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna now switch to internal kind of LHI updates. And I had put a list of resources here related to some of the things we've done on LHI for this topic. So this will be in the call. One of our colleagues, she's a product designer. She just finished a sprint to create a tenant form in New York, a tenant web page. It's more than a form. It's a whole tenant assistant universe. And so she posted some of the insights that she gained from doing that project. And there's a lot of overlap with what Ashley was saying. So, you know, I think that as you do this, you become more. The other thing, just this is my own personal mission in life, is to make sure that we live in the multilingual world that we are. And so part of thinking about design and testing is thinking in scale, so that whatever technology you create can always serve more than one language, because there's more than one language in the United States, and some of these communities are growing, as we know from the census. So, you know, we've done some of that in LHI, and I just encourage you to do that. Continue to think about how do you design so that then you can scale, and that you can have even include cultural competency as you design, because not necessarily everything is going to be the same for all the communities. And so some other resources that we had shared in prior years on that. In terms of announcements, I'm going to send a message to the list, but I wanted to let everybody here know that we continue to, you know, keeping a database trim and only having in there active what needs to be active is not only cost effective and good management, but it's also security and makes everything very scalable for us. So we are going to be not deleting, but retiring templates in LHI that haven't had use in 2 years. This is expected to happen when we do the next code push, which is gonna be in mid-September. So I'm gonna send an email to the list letting people know too. If you wanna go into your templates and decide which ones are gonna be retired, you can go do that. But you know, if you don't have time or we don't hear, there's gonna be a date when we move everything that hasn't had use in 2 years, which is much longer than our data retention policies, which generally we will only keep up to 12 months of last use for advocates. We're in the clear that none of those templates are going to have any save answers that would become unopenable once we move them into retire. So this is just a courtesy notice, but we're gonna code it because we know that a lot of you don't have time to be actively managing huge collections. The next code push is gonna be coming up. It's gonna be in September. It's gonna have a lot of really good enhancements, but also bug fixes that some of you have reported. And we're also going to push the new A to J viewer, which we were gonna push earlier on, but we decided to push it together with everything else. So that's what we're gonna do. The other thing that I'm doing in this call, and I will send an email, is that I am looking to recruit not a whole group, but maybe a group of people who have been working with LHI and are committed to continue doing online forums to help us do a marketing focus group and feedback process. So this is something that probably will happen in September, October. We are recruiting a marketing consultant for LHI, and we want to get feedback from partners that have been using the forms and are committed to continue using the forms. So if anybody is interested in being part of that group to work with that consultant, I would love for you to raise your hand or email me. I already have some volunteers from some states, but I want to make sure I have programs that come from resource starved states where there's not a lot of funding for that, states that have other challenges to online forums. You know, we want to hear from everybody. It can be you could have a small collection, you could have a new collection, you could have a brilliant collection. we want to get input from everyone as we think about LHI and where we're going with that. And the last part, let me see. Oh yeah, the last main announcement is that I don't know if you guys have seen, but the SCLAID just released, just approved the standards for the provision of civil legal aid. And those were last done in 2006. And they were updated and just got approved, I think, on August 3rd. There's going to be probably more information coming on from the ABA, etc. Angela was actually our lead on the technology working group, and you can imagine updating the technology language from 2006 to now was a big feat because we were still talking about hotlines back then. That was the cutting edge technology, and now we have AI and we have all kinds of things. So it's a really fun standard. I think it did a lot. I will encourage everybody to look at the cultural competency standard that really talks about new ways of cultural humility, etc. Really, really forward thinking and really more attuned with our identity as an access to justice community and who we serve, which is very diverse. And then the tech standards. The tech standards I think are really great, and never too late to start reading them, because hopefully for some of you they will help you. They will help you make the case to management for tech investments, and having the resources to do this great work with these tools and maintain what you build and maintain and keep up with the changes in technology. So just wanted to flag that. And the other thing is that we had shared this before in June. We are going to have a feature in LHI that is going to show up as a pay it forward request for end users. This is something that we want to do to be able to get donations, voluntary donations, to keep the system going. Like, we're keeping LHI super fast, and we continue to do a lot of the administrative work on the platform itself. The idea is that pay it forward will be voluntary donations by users who want to, we often get requests from people who say, hey, can I donate to you? That this was really great. I had seen that somebody was selling this for $400. You guys gave it to me for free. And the majority of people are low income users, less than 40,000 in LHI. There are some people that wanna contribute to the upkeep of the platform. And so we've decided we're going to do this and see how it goes. And we don't expect it's going to be a huge revenue source of support, but it's something that will help us, continue having involvement with some of our users. So this is gonna come out in the September code push, and this is kind of what it's gonna be like. I'm gonna stop and see if anybody has questions or comments. If you want me to unmute, I think we're a small group. Or if you wanna put a question in the chat. No? Okay. Well, I've kept you past 3 p.m. I thank you everybody for coming, and I hope that this was inspiring to go for design and to be curious, to come at it like a child with an open mind and no assumptions, and then to keep your forms projects going and moving and reiterating as you continue to get end user feedback and partner feedback. Because I think that's, once you get to that point where you have something solid, and then you keep adjusting for changes in law, for partnership purposes and stuff like that, that's when the projects get to be really fun and really impactful. So thank you all for your interest, and reach out if you want to participate in our marketing feedback loop.